So we're going to talk today about your fifth solo book, isn't it? The Infinite Mindfield The Quest to Find the Gateway to Higher Consciousness.
That's the one.
So what motivated you to tackle this particular book or this particular subject?
I suppose it's because for a long time I'm being fascinated by the greater implications of consciousness and its relationship with what we call consensual reality. And after I wrote the Out of Body book, I felt that there were areas there that I really had just touched upon. And I was keen to expand upon those areas, particularly the idea of inner light and the idea of the role of the pineal gland within consciousness. And really, I was absolutely staggered, as I always do when I start writing my books, as to where my daemon leads me, you know, and how everything seemed to fall together in the most amazing way.
Well, how does that work then? How does, as you call it, your daemon or your higher self, how do you use that in terms of, following, choosing subject matter?
Well, it's quite strange in that I will just instinctively feel that something is right about writing something. In other words, the ideas will seem to come from nowhere, left field, and I will be pointed in certain directions, and certain information will be given to me in the sense that, I'll read the right articles, the right books, and suddenly the information is there for me, and I get led from one element to the next, almost by chance, it seems to me. And this has happened with all my books, but particularly this one, because I ended up in areas that I would never have even believed that could have been possibly linked, and that was the thing that surprised me. Initially, I thought, it's just going to be a straightforward book on the pineal gland and neurology, the neurochemicals within it, and maybe touching a little bit on DMT and other subjects. But I found myself metaphorically writing a journey right along the Silk Road, from the deepest history to modern times, from ancient Sumer right through to the ancient Greek myths, the Eleusinian mysteries, the mystery of Kaikion, the mystery of Soma, the mystery of these drinks or drugs that people would take to actually talk to the gods. And I suddenly found amazing links with this, carrying it straight through to what is happening now with the Latin American shamans, the taking of ayahuasca. It was just absolutely incredible. It was the most incredible journey of all my books. This one was the real journey one. Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
And so there's a sort of a chronological line or an order to this book, is there?
Yeah, very much so. How I started is that the starting of the book is my description of my more information about my encounter with the hypnagogic light device, or now called the hypnagogic light experience. Because, as you guys know in the Walker group, because I discussed this, that when I came back after having my first experience with the Lucid light device over in Switzerland, I found that I was having very, very strange dreams. I was having dreams about snakes. I was having the feeling, a vibrationary feeling inside my head.
So for anybody that doesn't know the Lucid light device, what does it do?
Right, the Lucid light device is an invention by two Austrian researchers, Dr. Engelbert Winkler and Dr. Dirk Prokol. And what they've done in simple terms is they have designed a machine that, by using certain intensities of white light and stroboscopic light built up in a particular way and with particular patterns, can generate out-of-the-body experiences, or the sensation of out-of-the-body experiences. It can put you straight into that liminal state that we know as hypnagogia, where you're actually not quite asleep, not quite awake. So the question is, are you sort of semi-dreaming when you experience this light machine, or are you traveling to other locations in the macroverse? The light machine now is becoming more and more popular. In fact, I was at a huge event last weekend at the University of Greenwich, where Dr. Prokol, who, by the way, is a consultant neurologist, and Dr. Winkler is a consultant psychologist. So these guys, are serious scientists. That they earn their living professionally within the field that they've designed the light. But effectively, there was this 3-day event, and it was basically to do with psychotropic substances, ayahuasca, DMT, and various other things. And some of the world's leading people were there, people like Jeremy Narby, for instance. And the Lucid light device was set up while we were there. And again, as usual, people were coming out having experienced Lucia. And these were people who'd taken DMT, taken ayahuasca, and as is always the case, this is immediately powerful. This is an immediate high, this is an immediate rush, this is an immediate taking yourself to other places. So very, very powerful machine.
And isn't there a place now in London where people can go and... are you aware that there's a one in London where people can have a go on one of these machines?
Yeah, it's in Finsbury Park, and it's called Light Eye Mind. Yeah. I think I'm right in saying that the machine that Dr. Prokol had with him for the event over the weekend, in fact, was the machine from Light Eye Mind. The people are buying machines all over the world, and what they're doing is they are setting themselves up as small businesses, effectively. So you buy the machine, and then you become licensed to use it, and then you people buy time on the machine and buy courses on it and such.
So back to where you had your initial experience. You then had strange lingering after effects, you say?
Yeah, very much so. It was quite peculiar. After I had, and I described this in the book, I think I describe it in Toby, but I definitely describe it in The Infinite Mindfield, that I had some quite profound experiences while I was seeing the light, when I was under the influence of the light machine. But afterwards, when I started talking to the group of individuals I was with, people, for instance, Dr. Arthur Funkhauser was with us that day, one of the world's leading authorities on the déjà phenomenon. And myself and the three doctors were discussing general things about the light machine. And as they were doing so, I started to feel, and it may sound like rubbish this, but it is genuinely true, I started to feel a very, very strange sensation in the centre of my forehead. It was kind of a vibration or a feeling of a very, very small creature moving underneath the skin in the centre of my forehead. This quite disturbed me, because I thought, I'd never had anything like this before, and I thought, this is most peculiar. Anyway, as the evening progressed, it faded, and then it came back 2 or 3 times. And then I went to bed, and as I was going to bed and starting to drift off into sleep, I could really feel this kind of vibration sensation. And then I drifted off to sleep, and the dreams I had that night were profoundly odd, because they were vivid, they were memorable. I can still remember them now. You have certain dreams that you never forget, and it consisted of snakes. And it consisted of snakes looking at me, sort of large serpent-like creatures looking directly at me. And paying me a great deal of attention. It wasn't frightening, but it was quite peculiar. And when I woke up, the dream continued. I kept getting flashbacks from it. Now, I now subsequently know that this snake symbolism is tied very much to ayahuasca. People have similar experiences when they take dimethyltryptamine. And it seems that it is linked in some way. And Jeremy Narby, who again, I say, was at the event over the weekend, wrote a book on, I think it's something like DNA, the Cosmic Serpent or something. Mm-hmm. And this book is quite incredible, because Narby had almost exactly the same experience I had.
On what was that?
On ayahuasca. He was taking ayahuasca, and he has an encounter when he takes ayahuasca with 2 huge snakes. Now, I became intrigued by this, and I discussed this in the book, and I started to look into the symbolism of the snakes, and particularly 2 snakes. And of course, you start to look at the symbolism, you start to realize this symbolism is everywhere. It's in the caduceus, it's in Masonic symbolism, it's even in the symbolism going right back, where I do with the start of the book, right back to ancient Sumer.
Yeah.
Where you have the ideas of the Anunnaki.
Yeah. Are they Sumerian, are they, the Anunnaki? Anunnaki, is it?
Anunnaki, is that correct?
I don't know. I don't know. Who knows?
I don't. Anunnaki, or whatever. But yeah, they're Sumerian.
Yeah.
And the whole legend of the Anunnaki is really quite intriguing, because it is suggested by the ancient Sumerians that these guys came from the stars, and they had knowledge of the physical body. They had knowledge of many, many things, but they seem to be physicians, for want of a better term. And they very much taught the Sumerians many things. But some of the symbolism of their actual, and if you just bear with me a second, I can try and draw this up here. For a second, because I just need to sort of check my information here to make sure it's right. Yeah, let's see. As Lawrence Gardner says, a great Sumerian researcher, they called them, they were patrons and founders, they were teachers and justices, they were clinical technologists, agriculturists and kingmakers. They were jointly and severally venerated as archons and masters, but they certainly were not idols of religious worship, as the ritualistic gods of subsequent cultures became. In fact, the word which was eventually translated to become worship was avod, which meant quite simply work. The Anunnaki present and may baffle historians. Their language may confuse linguists, and their advanced technology may bewilder scientists, but to dismiss them is foolish. The Sumerians have themselves told us precisely what the Anunnaki were, and neither history nor science can prove it otherwise. And they're known as the beings who came from heaven to earth came. Now, the leader of the Anunnaki was a guy called Marduk, or Merodach, and he had many other names, including Nibiru. And his symbol was a disc with wings on either side. Now, this is generally considered to be a symbol of the sun as it flies across the sky. But I argue that it has a double meaning, because the sun is the source of external light. And I think there's evidence that the pineal gland generates internal light. And the wings, I think, symbolize the two hemispheres of the brain. And if you look at the Marduk symbol, you'll actually see that there's a kind of little circle between the two wings. I think that is the pineal gland. Because you'll also notice there's things hanging up below what we would call the wings or the brain. And this looks like the spinal cord. So what we have here is possibly something that really is a symbol of the brain and the human brain.
And where was this symbol found? This is on stone. This tablets.
Is on stones and such like, within Sumerian temples and such like. So clearly there's a symbolism here, but of course this symbolism then carries through, because you get into the caduceus, and you get it even into because what I do is then I carry on from the Sumerians to the Zoroastrians. And I discuss the symbolism and the belief system of the Zoroastrians, who, of course, are the modern-day Parsis in Bombay or Mumbai. Now, again, if you look at the belief systems of the Zoroastrians, it's really quite incredible. Now, you'll really find this intriguing, particularly as somebody who's read my previous books. But what the Zoroastrians believe is that every human being has a guardian spirit, which is called a Farvashi. Now, the Farvashi is given to you at the moment of your birth, and it carries through your life. Now, the human soul is known as the Urvan, and each Urvan has a Farvashi. They also believed in reincarnation, but not reincarnation the way we generally accept reincarnation. It was the idea of you lived multiple lives, but it's unclear what they mean by multiple lives. But the Farvashi carries the memories of your previous life forward to your next life. Now, what is more intriguing is that the Parsis also believe, or the Zoroastrians also believed, that each life, that you laid down the memories of that life in a place called the Panj e Zarvakesh e Batian. Yeah, the Panj e Zarvakesh e Batian. Which is located near something they call the api, which is in the centre of the brain, which is the pineal gland. So here we have a very ancient belief system that can be linked to ancient Sumer that is saying that the records of your life are actually recorded and kept in a kind of a safe, or kept in a kind of repository of information that's located near your pineal gland.
And what eras are we talking about here? What era was Sumer, and what era was Zoroastrian founded?
Well, the ancient Sumer started around, I would think, about the 3rd or 4th millennium BCE, mm-hmm. And they died out effectively around about 2200 BCE. When what was happening was that the soil of southern Mesopotamia became more saline, and they had to change their crops from wheat to salt-tolerant barley, but it meant that they couldn't support their population, which left them vulnerable, and the Akkadians, under a guy called Sargon the Great, came and virtually wiped them out. But what the Akkadians and the Assyrians did, they assimilated a lot of the belief systems of ancient Sumer in a similar way to the way the Romans assimilated ancient Greek culture. So it was then carried forward, and that's when in Persia, which of course is nearby to Mesopotamia, that's when then the Zoroastrians started up. And there is a logic to conclude that they were all influenced by each other. But what is very intriguing is that a couple of days ago I interviewed Patricia Awan, or A1, I'm trying to pronounce it correctly, and she is a member of the mystic school of chematology. And these are individuals that study the belief systems of the really, really ancient Egyptians, the pre-pharaonic Egyptians. And it's intriguing what she tells me about the symbolism of sacred geometry within the buildings within ancient Egypt. And indeed, I say this in the book, and she very much backs me up on this, that the ancient Egyptians were around about the same time as the Sumerians, and both of them looked back to an older civilization which seeded their belief systems. Now, for instance, one thing I mentioned in the book that it was Patricia that pointed it out to me, and I suppose I should know this for my basic knowledge of Greek, but the word pyramid is pyramidus, pyramidus, which actually means fire in the middle. Now, if you look at the location, I think it's of the Queen's Chamber or the King's Chamber. I'm not sure. It's probably the King's Chamber. It's located in the centre of the pyramid, which again is similar to the idea of the pineal gland in the skull. Now, on top of that, there are all massive symbolism within ancient Egyptian buildings and ancient geometry that is always referencing the pineal gland. Mm-hmm. So again, we have this theme continuing right through all the civilizations.
Do you think that it was kind of all covert allusions to the pineal, or is there anything actually in these cultures that overtly identified it as an important organ?
Oh yes, no, very much so. They revered it. That it was named, and it is considered to be of profound importance. And it is the intriguing thing is the way it's also linked, for instance, to is the Ida and the Pingala when people have Kundalini experiences.
This is the two energy channels.
The energy channels that run up the spine.
According to which tradition is this?
I think it's probably Vedic. I
guess so. Yeah.
So we're talking northern India here.
Yeah.
And again, they have the idea that there are the two channels that run up the spine, and it hits somewhere in the skull and enlightens the pineal gland. So again, now effectively, then you get this symbolism. Once you start to spot it, I spent a wonderful few days reading Manly Hall, and if you read a lot of his work, he was a scholar of ancient belief systems, and I think he may have been a high-ranking Mason. Yeah, but there's a lot of Freemasonry in his writing. And if you look at the symbolism in Freemasonry, it's intriguing because they have this symbolism of two pillars and a circle and a disc and the caduceus. There are a series of buildings in New York, and when I came across this, I contacted a friend of mine in New York and asked her to check out some of the buildings. particularly buildings built by a particular guy who was responsible for the building of quite a few of the major American Masonic lodges in the early 20th century. And this guy built buildings in Lower Manhattan, and the symbolism is in plain sight. You know, it's the pineal gland, it's the two pillars, and the pillars are sometimes depicted as snakes. Now, again, we have this twin pillar thing, we have the snake symbolism, and this is all linking directly, I believe, to the activation of the pineal gland, and that the pineal gland is something that is just waiting there to be stimulated.
So where did your investigations lead after the Zoroastrians?
Well, from the Zoroastrians, I then moved into Hinduism, and particularly Vedanta, and the idea of the belief systems that they have, particularly the idea of the lotus. And they have this whole symbolism of the lotus, which again, the lotus, and they call it the lotus of the heart.
This is the lotus flower, is it?
Yeah. It's a symbol again of something that's inside the body that's very, very powerful, and it's something that can put you into dreamless sleep. And again, this again goes into the whole idea of the Kundalini and the Kundalini experience. Now, they believe that what actually happens is that something called the Sushumni actually climbs through the body, up the Pingala and the Ida, and again, the flow of the prana, the energy, hits the pineal gland as well. So from there, I then realised that this was flowing eastwards, and it was quite fascinating how I could trace the development of this, because there is a particular form of Hinduism called Kashmir Shaivism, which I'd never heard of before. And this again has this idea, they call it something called prakasa, or prakasha, which is the light of consciousness. So suddenly we're having these links with the pineal gland and the symbolism of light. And it is clear that, again, what they're talking about is linking light to the pineal gland. And it was Kashmiri Shaivism that also had influences on Buddhism and various other belief systems.
So which era is this? How long ago is this?
We're talking about 300 BC, BC, somewhere of that region.
Okay.
And then the curious thing is then the fascination with the pineal gland then becomes huge, because a few years ago I was in Cambodia and I visited the complex known as Angkor Wat, the complex near Siem Reap in the center of Cambodia. And the main temple, the main Angkor Wat, the main temple itself, if you look at that temple, you will realize that you will see that it has, I think it's 5 very, very large towers. Now, these towers are huge pine cones. Now, the reason the pineal gland is called the pineal gland is because it looks like a pine cone. So here we have, again, symbolism in plain sight. We have these huge symbols in the middle of the Cambodian jungle, built by originally, I think they would have been a Buddhist group that were converted to Hinduism, or one way or the other. Yeah, they were originally Hindu, and they became Buddhist, the people who actually built the Angkor Wat complex. And this was built around the 12th century CE, so Common Era, so it's not that old, relatively speaking. But clearly the religious symbolism there is powerful. So here we have powerful symbolism of the pineal gland. But what is even weirder is one of the temples I went to there is called the Bion. And the Bion is the most amazing place I think I've ever been, because the temple has towers, and the towers have carved faces. The towers have huge faces carved in them. And they all have the pineal gland and the third eye symbolism in the center of the forehead. All of them. So clearly, again, that they're actually screaming out to us to say, this is what we believe. The third eye is absolutely paramount to our belief systems. Mm-hmm. So we have Buddhism. Then we take it north and we move up to the Tibet Plateau, and suddenly we then encounter a unique form of Buddhism called the Bon tradition, which is based upon shamanism and the shamanic traditions of the high plateau. And because we know Buddhism is a very, very syncretic religion, what they would do is they would accommodate other belief systems. Now, interestingly enough, Dr. Prokol and Dr. Winkler, together with a guy called Erlander Haraldsson, who is a professor of psychology at the University of Iceland, the three of them took a Lucia machine to Tibet, April, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. And they actually had practitioners of dream yoga using the lucid light devices. And these guys actually said that within 10 minutes of using the lucid light device, they were seeing things that takes years and years of the particular rigid training that they do called dream yoga. So they were saying that almost, within a few minutes, they were seeing mandalas, they were feeling like they were out of their body. Very, very powerful stuff. But what was more intriguing was that Dr. Winkler and Dr. Prokol had a spur day before they were heading back down into India. And they were given virtual free access around the Potala Palace in Lhasa. And they came across a room. And inside the room were huge black glass cases. And inside these glass cases were ossified pineal glands, massive pineal glands. They thought they were probably elephants' pineal glands. So
where were these pineal glands being held?
They were held within one of the rooms within the Potala Palace, which is the main palace in Lhasa. It's the huge building. If you ever see pictures of Lhasa, the symbol of Lhasa is this huge, huge Buddhist complex called the Potala.
So it's like a civic building that's open to tourists and locals.
That I'm unsure about whether it's generally open to tourists. I think there probably are certain areas that are open to tourists.
So what was the explanation for these being held there, kept there?
Winkler asked the guides, and the guides didn't know. They actually said it just goes back deep into the history. But they didn't know what the symbolism meant. Now, I'm very keen at some stage in the future to probably try and journey there. I mean, I'm going to northern India next January, and I'm hoping to maybe, if we get the time, to probably head up there. I don't know whether I'll get the chance, because we are actually very organised in where we're going. But nevertheless, at some stage in the future, I would just like to follow this up. I have discussed it with the doctors, and I want more information about it, because it was extremely intriguing. Extremely intriguing. So
by now, you're pretty sure that the pineal gland is held in high regard by hundreds of years of esoteric tradition.
Totally. Yeah. I think that both Eastern tradition and Western tradition, because after I finish with the Eastern tradition in the book, I then move on to the Western tradition, and the Western tradition of the mysteries that effectively started with the ancient Egyptians, and then carried through across from Alexandria to ancient Egypt.
But a quick digression. It's according to modern science, the pineal gland is thought to release certain hormones. Is that right?
Correct, yeah. It is known to release a particular hormone called melatonin.
Melatonin, yeah.
And melatonin is what is effectively the sleep drug. It reacts to periods of darkness, and it's what puts us to sleep. Now, of course, the intriguing thing here is physiologically how a small object buried deep in the centre of the brain can be sensitive to the fact that there's lack of light, when in fact light comes through the eyes, is incredibly intriguing. Now, the pineal gland is located above what's called the optic chiasma, I think it's called, but it's not in direct contact with it. But what is more intriguing about the pineal gland is that it's an eye. It is an ossified eye.
A vestigial eye, do they call it?
It's a vestigial eye, yeah. In fact, there is a New Zealand lizard called a tutura, which it is a third eye, literally. Yeah. But they found that in lower animals there is a lens, there's a retina. So clearly it is an eye. Now the intriguing thing is why and how did ancient cultures become aware of that? You know, how did they know that it was an eye? You know, the only reason that people were fascinated by the pineal gland is that it's one of the few objects in the brain that's not copied. Yeah. In other words, you know, you have two hemispheres, you have two amygdala, you have two hippocampi. Yeah.
It's the only singular item in the brain.
It is that there is another singular item. I think the pituitary is single as well. Okay. But effectively, it's where it's located as well. And I know people like René Descartes very much felt that there was something to do with the pineal gland with consciousness, and Descartes suggested that was where the soul resided. So clearly within even Western traditions we find this. But if we then carry forward to the belief systems of ancient Greece, we find yet again we have there's a symbolism of something called Betel, the belly button, the omphalos, and an omphalos looks again like a pine cone. You know, if you go to Delphi, you'll actually see this little object that sits in the middle of Delphi, and it's supposed to be the central point of the Greek Empire. Now, the ancient Greeks themselves had something else that they used to enliven their abilities to travel within the inner world, and it was the Eleusinian Mysteries. And they used to drink a substance called kykeon. And kykeon, people have never really been sure exactly what kykeon is, but it seems to be some kind of hallucinogenic drug.
This is a little bit like soma. Where did soma come from?
Soma is exactly the same mystery.
They don't know what that was, do they, either?
They're never sure what soma is. Now, I believe that soma, only from my own limited research in this, that I think that soma is a similar form of dimethyltryptamine, possibly. It's a harmine, because harmalon, I think there is the Syrian rue, I think is a plant that grows in the Middle East. And I know that you can synthesize from that very, very powerful hallucinogens. So...
And who was using soma? This is the ancient Aryans in India.
Yeah, soma would be going again towards, the Aryans, the northern Indians, the Iranians possibly. Right. Whereas kykeon was more to do with the ancient Greeks.
Yeah.
But again, these are mystery subjects. Now, again, within the Eleusinian Mysteries, there's something called, Manly P. Hall goes on about this, something called the Toys of Bacchus. And it was something called a thrysus, which was a staff made of reed, and it was topped with a pine cone. Now, again, we have this idea of Bacchus, you know, the great god Bacchus playing with this mysterious object that has a pine cone on the top. So yet again, we have this symbolism of just the pine cone. Now, one of the things that Hall describes is that when people used to take kykeon and everything else, they used to hear an inner sound. This is a quote from Manly Hall. Hearing an inner sound or sounds classically described as a flute, a drum, a waterfall, birds singing, bees buzzing, but also sounds like roaring, whooshing, or thunderous noises like ringing in the ears. Now, Martin, I know from your experiences of out-of-the-body experiences, this is known to be a standard thing. It's the humming sound. It's the vibration.
Yeah, it can also sound like a rocket taking off, and this is what's linked to the point at which the astral body begins to split from the physical body.
Yes, exactly. So again, we have the linking here with the ancient Greeks. Yeah. You know, so
I think with DMT, I've heard with DMT, the DMT experience, I think McKenna described it as cellophane being ripped off his head or something like that.
Very, very good. Typical McKenna in terms of its descriptive powers, I think. Clearly, and what then gets interesting, I keep saying gets interesting because, I mean, I should be perhaps the interesting Peake, really. I'm not, but the things I try to read about
is all interesting.
It's all interesting, yeah. Is that it then moves into Judaism.
Really?
Particularly into the Kabbalah and the Kabbalah teachings. And if you actually look at the teachings of the Kabbalah, particularly the work of somebody called Rabbi Joel David Bakst, who lives in Manitou Springs in Colorado. Now, I've been in contact many times with Joel. And Joel, if anybody's interested in Joel's work, he's interviewed in the movie The Spirit Molecule. Now, again, as an aside, the foreword to the Infinite Mindfield is actually written by Mitch Schultz, who was the director and writer of the movie The Spirit Molecule. So, we've got links in there. But if you look up Rabbi Joel Bakst on YouTube, you'll see the sections or the outtakes from the making of the movie The Spirit Molecule, where he's discussing the role of the pineal gland within the traditions of Kabbalah. And he's written an amazing paper called The Foundation Stone and the Jerusalem of the Mind. And in this, he's quite precise. What he's saying is that most of the symbolism, something called the weaving stone, that is actually known within Kabbalistic traditions, is symbolic of the pineal gland. So again, we have the ancient traditions here of Judaism, we have the ancient traditions of ancient Egypt, we have most of the major religions all having the same thing. Yeah. Now, again, what is intriguing is that when the story of which one is it? Is it Jacob? It's Jacob and the ladder in Genesis, where he sees the face of God.
Yeah.
Okay, the face of God in Hebrew is called Peniel.
Really?
Okay, and as Joel Bakst says, in Genesis it says Jacob named the place where he had the ladder going up to heaven. He called it Peniel. So we have the pineal and peniel here. So we're having symbolism within symbolism and words within words. And in fact, Joel calls his principle the P2P principle, pineal to penial. And again, if you read some of his papers, they're online. You can actually download a lot of his work. It is absolutely fascinating. And he has spent his life as a Kabbalah scholar. This guy really, really knows his stuff. And again, he and I are in total agreement about what this symbolism means.
So the pineal has been a constant through all these traditions. Is there any constant in terms of the methods by which they are trying to instruct people into awakening it?
Oh, very much so, yeah. I think most of the mystery traditions are there specifically to awaken the pineal gland. And what I suspect is that what you're actually doing by awakening the pineal gland, what in fact you're doing is getting the pineal gland, or the pineal gland, I'm never quite sure, it's a pineal, I think Rick Strassman calls it pineal, so I'll go with Rick, is that it allows the pineal gland itself to excrete endogenous, that is internally generated dimethyltryptamine.
So this is still a theory, is it?
No. It's far more than a theory now. One of the things that literally around about 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a series of experiments done in America with live rats, and they found that DMT was found in the pineal gland of live rats.
Really?
Now, this is revolutionary.
So that's breaking news, huh?
This is breaking news. This wasn't even mentioned in the event at the University of Greenwich. I had to sit tight in a lecture hall listening to somebody lecturing, saying that, that unfortunately there is strong possibility.
Yeah.
That because it's in the blood and it's in various other places in spinal fluid.
Yeah.
But effectively, one of the major problems with DMT is that it doesn't last very long. It disappears quickly within the brain. So the chances of ever discovering it, you'd have to operate on a live person and actually watch it excrete, which would almost be impossible to do.
So almost certainly it's created by the pineal gland?
Almost certainly, yeah.
Wow.
And in fact, there's a guy called Beach Barrett, who I owe a great deal to, who's a part of, I think, the Cottonwood Research Institute. And he has written a paper, and again, this is downloadable on the web. If you just look up Beach Barrett, Beach, and Barrett as a surname, and he calls endogenously generated DMT, he calls it metatonin, as opposed to melatonin, because they're very, very similar chemically. And
So the pineal does create melatonin and almost certainly DMT.
Yes, almost certainly.
Yeah.
And it's not surprising because the two substances are very, very close. So it's not surprising that these things do this. But for me, what is intriguing is what DMT is doing. You know, it's all well and good to say that DMT is a chemical substance that exists in plants, it exists everywhere, so clearly it's totally natural. Why it brings about these states of consciousness? You know, what is it about the chemical structure of that actually affects the brain in the way it does? Now, in the book, I mentioned something called the TARS receptors, the trace amine activated receptor, I think it is. No, trace amine associated receptors. Now, these were discovered comparatively recently, and they are receptor sites in the neurons of the brain that are literally like a key to a lock. They will only react with tryptamines.
Yeah.
And, of course, dimethyltryptamine is a tryptamine.
Yeah.
So here we have evidence.
And tryptamines are also the psychoactive agents in magic mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like psilocybin.
Psilocybin.
Yeah.
Now, of course, here we have something that is very intriguing because it means that we have evolved. You know, this is what fascinates me. We have evolved these structures in the brain in order for DMT to be in the brain. Why? If you take an evolutionary viewpoint, evolution happens because it's a reaction to the environment, but it's something that the body has or needs. Now, could it be that what is happening now is we are evolving to the point that suddenly our physical state will change because our brains are going to change because of the way in which we can now react with dimethyltryptamine? Now, on top of this, in the book I deal with the neurology, and I go into quite a lot of detail of the neurology and some of the latest neurological research on this. I also discuss some of the areas of particle physics and quantum physics, and something that fascinates the life out of me, something called bioluminescence and biophotons. And this is light that's given off by DNA.
Uh-huh.
DNA itself gives off light. Okay? Now, why does it do that? What's happening here? What is this light? How is it processed? Can we see this light inside ourselves, this inner light? Now, it's jumping to conclusions, I know, and people will probably criticize me for it, and people do. But if the pineal gland is a form of eye that's buried deep within the brain, where it doesn't have any natural light, could it be the eye that looks inwards into the biophotons? The people like Froelich and various other people have been working on this, and some wonderful work at the moment being done by a Facebook friend of mine called Istvan Bokken in Hungary, where Istvan has recently shown that the human eye gives off light.
Yeah, I read about that recently, yeah.
Now, because what does this mean? This is the inner light again. These are the biophotons we're talking.
Is it only the eye that gives off light externally from the body? Or, does the skin, what else?
Well, there's an argument to say that the whole body will be giving off electromagnetic radiation, which, of course, is light. Yeah. So, in which case, we're now going back to the idea of the aura and the etheric body or the auric body. So suddenly there's an awful lot of these esoteric traditions that suddenly can be vindicated by this discovery. Now, if this inner light is drawn up from somewhere, I suggest that this from somewhere is from something known as the 0 point field, 0 point energy. And I suspect that there's some kind of structures within the brain that can draw up the information and recreate it via the pineal gland into consciousness, which can create an inner three-dimensional reality. That inner three-dimensional reality is the reality we go to when we look inward. That's the reality we go to when we have out-of-the-body experiences, when we have lucid dreams. Because I've long been intrigued as to what illuminates your dreams. Where is this light that you see by in a dream or a lucid dream or an out-of-the-body experience? It's clearly not external light. It's not external light from the stars or the sun or the moon or whatever. It's another form of light. It's an esoteric light. It's an inner light. Now, if you go back again to the esoteric traditions, you will find this light symbolism is there time and time and time again. Near-death experiences go towards the light, the tunnel. You know, this is something that is intriguing me. And I think I'm pulling together something that seems to make a degree of sense. A lot of it is supposition, but it has to be. Because how on earth can we ever really empirically show these things? Because we're dealing with perceptions. And perceptions are the most subjective things possible.
Yeah. So how are you positing that the pineal deals with light? And you think that the light is emitted from the DNA internally, and then the pineal, what does the pineal do with it?
Well, that's it. I think the pineal gland probably works in a similar way to the eyes, in that it processes the light and converts it into, one assumes, into electrical impulses, which then feed down to the visual cortex. And it would be interesting to see how that would work and whether that could be plotted using an fMRI or something similar. Because I think I'm right in saying that they have managed to trace, when people are in deep meditative states, there are certain parts of the brain that light up, clearly showing that there is certain brain activity that is stimulated by looking inwardly.
Well, one of the things that meditation does in the brain, I believe, is that it's sort of, if done for, intensely enough, it shuts off the part of the brain most to do with the sense of the self or the individual ego.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. This idea that what we do is we appreciate, in its literal term, the fact that we are not a single entity.
Yeah.
We lose the ego and we become part of the great oneness. Now, in the final section of the book, I mean, it's amazing you reference that, because in the final section of the book, this is exactly where I move on to, because I start discussing the work of Professor Bernard Heisch, who's an American astrophysicist, and his amazing book, The God Theory. I also cite the work of Martin W. Ball, who's an anthropologist who's written a book called The Entheological Paradigm. And both these guys are very much suggesting that we are a single entity experiencing itself subjectively. Now, you and I know that it's been one of our favourite discussion topics in the Walker Group.
Yeah.
This idea of we are all a single entity experiencing itself subjectively in our own self-created soap opera.
Yeah.
In other words, and this comes back to my next book as well, the Philip K. Dick book, which is due out in November, where I've written a biography of Philip K. Dick. And Philip K. Dick, in his final few post-Valis experience novels, discusses the idea of God experiencing himself subjectively within the world. I'm reminded, for instance, of The Divine Invasion, the book, where the little boy, Manny, is in fact God, but he's forgotten he's God. The anamnesis, the idea that we have forgotten our own divinity. Now, again, we know that there's the famous monologue by Bill Hicks, the matter slowed down to a vibration to...
Yeah. This is the positive drug story on the news.
Yeah, that's the one, isn't it? Man on LSD.
Yeah.
And again, he uses the term, that we are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively.
Yeah, because I guess he was that guy, wasn't he, who had that experience?
Oh, was he? I didn't know that.
I imagine so, yeah. I think that's why he did that piece, actually. I'm guessing that. I know he had some amazing experiences on magic mushrooms that changed him, and his friends said it took away his fear, and he became a very, very different performer after it.
Oh, that's intriguing, because I always think that it's all very sad that he's not around anymore, because I'm sure had he been around, he would have been a member of our Walker Group, as probably Phil would have done.
Yeah.
But again, Phil Dick very much came to this conclusion. If you read sections of the exegesis, this is exactly where he's going with it all, And of course, again, this is nothing new.
It's Vedantism, isn't it, really?
Totally, it's the concept of Brahman. It's the concept of, that we are just emanations of Brahman.
It's a bored god who is having a dream to entertain himself.
Yes, and you take it back to the concept of panpsychism, and the belief system of panpsychism in the West, and the ideas of people like Spinoza, that this is nothing new at all. The great philosophers have thought this for a long, long time. But what it seems to be suggesting is that a lot of the science is bringing this together. I think in many ways one of the major problems I had with Infinite Mindfield is its level of ambition is phenomenal. I spun off into so many different areas that each chapter could make a book in its own right. And it was an adventure. It was absolutely fantastic. I was completely exhausted when I finished it, but I had to then start straight away on the Philip K. Dick biography. But nevertheless, now that it's done and dusted, I feel that, it's... Personally, I'm very, very proud of it.
Yeah. I just want to say, I've had a similar experience with that sensation in the third eye, and mine seemed to begin sometime around after I got into Vipassana meditation, which is when you go on a 10-day silent retreat, 10 plus hours a day of meditation every day. So, there's some correlation there with my own experiences, and I still have it. I still have it regularly. I find it really annoying, actually. And the dreams that you have when you go on these retreats are incredible as well. Absolutely incredible.
And do they stick in your mind as well, so you don't forget them?
Yeah, a few of them. I mean, one of them I had on a retreat once actually warned me off my investigations into the out-of-body experience in a very profound way, and from then on I realised that I had to ground myself in this body a bit more. So these dreams have a way of getting your attention. Yeah.
Yeah, Philip K. Dick actually gave them a term, and I can't remember what term he used for the kind of really vivid dreams that they mean something.
Yeah, they're a different quality, aren't they?
Yeah, in every single way. Yeah. Funnily enough, in terms of going forward now as well, one of the things that Watkins books now want me to consider is writing a book on junk DNA. They've approached me to say that this is the first time I've actually mentioned this in an interview, by the way, because that's, might be the project. As you know, I'm writing a book with Irvin Laszlo at the moment on evidence of extracorporeal existence, whether consciousness can exist outside of the body. But after I finish that project, which I deliver in November, it's then the next project, which probably will be following up on the role of DNA within all this, because I think DNA manifests itself as the snakes. Yeah. I think that DNA itself is the thing that is driving us, and DNA is the God.
It's immortal, isn't it, the DNA?
Totally.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing about DNA and the cycles. And of course, if you look at the double helix of DNA, you will realise that what is it? It looks like two snakes coiling around each other. Now, again, Francis Crick, was it Francis Crick or Watson? It was one of the two of them anyway, has postulated that there is no possible way that that life is only just here, because the way in which DNA is means that it has evolved itself, and it uses us as vehicles of DNA to do this. And I'm reminded of a quotation in Valis by Philip K. Dick, where he says, and this is literal quotations, I've just found it now, it says, "It is proper to say we appear to be memory coils, DNA carriers capable of experience in a computer-like thinking system, which, although we have correctly recorded thousands of years of experiential information, and each of us possess somewhat different deposits from all of the life forms, there is a malfunction, a failure of memory retrieval." So again, here we have this idea of the failure of memory retrieval because we're not supposed to know what we are. Of course, then that begs the question, if we are not supposed to know what we are, how the hell am I being allowed to write this?
Well, I mean, my understanding is that we want the divine being or whatever, that begun it all, wanted to forget, but it also doesn't want to forget forever.
Yeah.
So interwoven into it all is the ability, when a soul is ready, to investigate and discover if one wants to.
Well, I suppose there is again the argument, if we take an extreme solipsistic viewpoint of this and believe that each human being collapses their own wave function of reality, in which case we are all journeying along towards amalgamation with the greater something, the oceanic experience and everything else, and each one of us is tasked to find our way back to the source, and each one of us is existing in our own phaneron, our own worldview, and we interface with other people who teach us things, and then we move on. And in which case we are alone, in the sense that we are alone within our own created world. But of course we're not alone, because we are a unity. So, and you start to find that the words become inadequate to explain a lot of these things, because I find that one of the struggles I have sometimes is actually writing down the things I'm thinking, using a language that can explain it. Sometimes it's just intuitive, isn't it? You just know, but you can't use the words, don't work.
Do you want to? You mentioned ayahuasca, where it's this, the shamanism of Latin America is the sort of end point. Did you say of this chronological history of esotericism? Is that an end point? Do you want to?
Yeah, effectively, in terms of the historical discussions, I then move on to the modern researchers of ayahuasca, and I particularly reference the work of people like Benny Shannon, an Israeli ethnobotanist. He's an ethnobotanist, he may not be, and Shulgren and various other, Jeremy Narby, the main guys that are actually doing the field work now down in the jungles of Amazonia. Because one of the most intriguing things of all of the things that I found out about was the role of how ayahuasca is made, in the sense that ayahuasca is a mixture of two different plants, Psychiopteri viridas and Banisteriopus capi, I think it is. Forgive me if I've got those terms wrong. One of them contains DNA, which I think is the Banisterius.
DMT.
Fine.
DMT.
But, yeah, it contains DMT. Yeah. What did I just say?
DNA.
DNA, God.
Contains that too.
Yeah, it probably does as well, yeah. And the fascinating thing is that if you actually drink or ingest the Banisterius capi and chew it, it goes into your stomach and you will not have any form of trip or anything else, because there's something called my brain's just gone blank.
Monoamine oxidase.
Monoamine oxidase, which is a particular chemical that reacts to stop the DMT going through the stomach wall and entering the bloodstream and therefore into the brain. But there is an NDMA restrictor, inhibitor, found in the Psychiopteris cap, the other plant. And the two of them work together to facilitate the DMT getting to the brain. Now, when the shamans were asked, of all the 5,000 or 50,000 or so species of plants that are found in the Amazon basin, why did they choose those two plants to join them together in a particular configuration to create ayahuasca? They actually said the plants told them. So clearly here we have something quite intriguing, because the shamans get themselves into trance states without the facility of entheogens. They can just do it because that's what they're trained to do. When they're in these states, they encounter other beings. These beings are usually snakes, and the snakes tell them, and the snakes told them, this is how you create the gateway, the portal for everybody else to experience the things. Now, again, Jeremy Narby very much points this out, and Benny Shannon tells a wonderful story, and he said the secret of everything, when God created everything, or the God of the Amazonian jungle, they claimed that he hid the secret of everything in a place that no one would ever think to look. And that place was deep within the brain. And that's where the secret lies. We are far more special than we can ever imagine ourselves being. This is not a naive suggestion of putting man back to the centre of the universe as it was before Copernicus. All I'm saying is that we have to realise that there's an interface between consciousness and external reality. It's known from quantum physics, it's known from the observer effect. Clearly, consciousness is integral to whatever it is that is out there. And I think that these hallucinogenic drugs, these entheogens, are facilitating our understanding of the true nature of reality.